fear. God, you are with me. I know you're near. You'll never leave me. I will trust in you alone. When I'm broken in the silence, I can hear you whispering. You're not alone here in these trials. I will hold you faithfully. Oh, you are my help forever. I will not fear. God, you are with me. I know you're near. You'll never leave me. I will trust in you alone. And when my heart and strength have failed me, my God, you won't. Your name is mighty. I will trust in you alone. You are a fortress for the weak, in strength that carries me when I am on my knees. The cross reminds my heart to trust your faithfulness and love will always be enough. Oh, you are a fortress for the weak, the strength that carries me when I am on my knees. The cross reminds my heart to trust your faithfulness and love will always be enough. Oh, you are a fortress for the weak, the strength that carries me when I am on my knees. The cross reminds my heart to trust your faithfulness and love will always be enough. I will not fear. God, you are with me. I know you're near. You'll never leave me. I will trust in you alone. And when my heart and strength have failed me, my God, you won't. Your name is mighty. I will trust in you alone. I will trust in you alone. I will trust in you alone. And I will not fear. God, you are with me. I know you're near. You'll never leave me. I will trust in you alone. I will trust in you alone.
Jesus, precious Jesus, what What a remarkable reality that we have you and we can trust in you. We thank you that you are our fortress. We thank you that you do see us, every detail and every aspect, and you care, and you come to serve us. It's mind-boggling. So we surrender our lives to you in response. We give everything that we are to you and ask only that you come and increase our knowledge of you. Thank you for what you've done in our midst and what you're going to do, and we bless your name. In Jesus' name, amen.
In the summer of 2020, God really provided this property where I'm standing right now. It was thick with trees back then when I came and saw it for the first time, and things are looking much different here now. But in 2021, through Above and Beyond at Watermark, we had a matching gift of $50,000 offered. It was actually our first donation towards this project. It was more money than we'd ever raised for a local project through Above and Beyond, and it sounded really impossible to me. But then Watermark matched that full $50,000 plus a little bit. And those were the very first dollars donated towards this dream. After lots of preparation and planning and wrangling our way through zoning ordinances and a few obstacles, we finally broke ground last year on the first of our duplexes. And just over a month ago, we were able to open up our first 2 apartments for youth who age out of the foster care system. Both of these apartments are now occupied with a youth who are in need of a fresh start in life after foster care. Both of these youth came in with very little or nothing. They moved into fully furnished apartments, and now they have 2 years of this program to build up their savings, their credit, and their income. At the end of 2 years, besides their personal savings, they will have $2,400 from their program fees and security deposit to apply to their next apartment. And they will have established a budget that sets them up to be fully independent. When they moved in and signed their leases, their relief at knowing they have the next 2 years taken care of. That's 2 years of not wondering where they're gonna sleep next week or next month. 2 years to get themselves prepared for their next steps. It was visible and it was overwhelming. There were more than a few tears all around on move-in day. These are 2 lives that are so far being impacted by this program, but it's really just the beginning. In our first month, we had 10 applications that came in for these first 2 apartments, which tells us something about the need here in West Michigan. And God has been good, going ahead of us, reaching more people who want to help and donate and be a part of what's happening here. As of today, we have raised in total for this project just a little bit over $580,000. This allows us to go so much further and so much faster than I ever dreamed we could. It means that after we've done a lot of the site work and engineering, we have raised enough to build not just this duplex, but 2 more duplexes, so we can open 4 more apartments by the end of this year. The footings for duplex number 2 are getting poured this afternoon, as a matter of fact. And we're not stopping there. This property was a gift from God. He had the plan for all of this long before we ever did. And we have room here for 7 duplexes, a total of 14 apartments. And I was just thinking about that. That means every 2 years we can change the outcome for 14 youth coming out of foster care. In 20 years, that's 140 adults who will have been set on a path to self-sufficiency through this program. We have the opportunity to impact 140 families over the next 20 years, helping them achieve more than they thought was possible. And I can't even begin to tell you how excited I am about that. I can't even tell you how humbled I am by that God would choose to do something here in this spot and that we get to be involved in it. I'm just so grateful. And I'm so grateful to all of you who have supported and given and prayed, not just for this project, but for all the support and the hope that we can bring to foster and adoptive families every day through family events, closets, and encouragement. I know foster families and kids who feel more seen and less alone because of the support that you have offered. A church community that gets behind foster and adoptive families is more of an encouragement than you might ever realize, and we are so grateful to all of you for being a part of it.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? I was actually sitting there and saying, like, Brad, don't get emotional. Like, keep the emotions apart so you can actually do what you're supposed to do next, because it is so cool. I think we often say, Like, let's be a part of what God's doing. And then it's like, I don't know that I've experienced that or know what that looks like. I know what that looks like. I've experienced that, and it's amazing, and it's so cool. So I'm so grateful for how God went ahead of the Steels and gave them a vision that he had to see redemption in the foster and adoption community. And then we got invited into that. And because of you and because of your giving, the time, all of those things, we're seeing these projects happen in lives be changed and transformed. And they're not just in the community, they're in our faith family. We have people in my missional community who, since the beginning of all of this, have started fostering kids, and now they're moving on to adoption. And it's so amazing to see how God's moving and changing the lives of families and kids. And because of that, we had a water marker that you saw up here earlier, Robin Wilcox, who just felt compelled to help raise some more funds, because even though Kids Belong has raised over $500,000, a lot of that is earmarked towards construction only and can't help with the work that Kids Belong is doing on a regular basis. And so Robin's putting together this community garage sale coming up on June 15th here at the Hub. And what we would love to see is for you to be a part of it, to bring your garage sale items to sell at this fundraiser to help raise funds for the ongoing work of Kids Belong. We would love for you to be a part of that. So if you got some stuff in your garage that you're like, hey, we could get rid of this, or we got some stuff in our house that's like, that's been taking up some space, or we've moved on, our kids have grown up, or we've changed seasons of life, we would love for you to bring your stuff to be a part of this community fundraiser here at the Hub on June 15th. And you can sign up for that at wm.church. It's not gonna work unless we sign up and do it together, so we'd love for you to be a part of that. You can sign up for that during Life Together. You can also find Robin. She'll be in the back, maybe by the welcome area. So if you have questions of what that looks like or how you can be involved in that, she'll be back there and would love to answer those as well. There's also a ton of other stuff going on in Watermark. The wm.church just got a bunch of huge updates and things that are coming up this summer and things that you should be aware of. So we would love for you to go check out wm.church for all of that information. And you can do that during this next time of Life Together, where you can grab some food or drink in the back, use the bathrooms, and then we'll call you back in a few minutes to start a brand new series called Tripped Up. So enjoy all those things. Thanks.
Oop, I muted it. Doggone it. When I think I got it right, I'm like, come on. Thank you all for joining us and for just participating together as a faith family and pursuing God and an encounter with Him. Like as Mary mentioned, we're actually purposefully taking like once a month to lean into these times of prayer, specifically for healing, like we did today, and we want to see how God is speaking to us and moving, and we've been wanting to step out and grow in our faith and our understanding by having these specific times set apart during our gatherings. But probably we all have questions about this. Like none of us are experts, I presume. Unless you are, please come talk to me. I'd like to talk to you more about this. But like, there's a lot of questions around healing and faith and authority and how that all plays out and how we get to play a part in it. And so actually, Mary and I are planning on doing a teaching a little bit later this summer on it to dig into kind of the scriptural roots and foundations of that. But we were curious, like if you have any questions that you think that you would love to have answered, that might help us in shaping kind of to answer some of the questions that you might have. So if you have questions surrounding healing, faith, authority, words of knowledge is kind of the scriptural catchphrase there, how God speaks to us, any of those things, we would love to hear from you on your questions. So you can submit those on wm.church. There's a little button right there called questions. Click on it, and it's completely anonymous. So you can have your way. It's, when you throw out anonymous, we just don't want people to feel embarrassed by things, but we'll know if you're being silly, right? Yeah, we've gotten those before. Those are fun. All right, so as Brad mentioned, we're starting a brand new series called Tripped Up. You can see those laces untied and just ripe for a little bit of a spill. And the thing is, it feels like as we go through life, we just are expecting another shoe to drop somewhere. Another news source reporting about somebody has tripped up, somebody has messed up, somebody has fallen from grace. And I think most of our prominent examples in our minds, maybe in the church world, come from the church world, church leadership, bigger churches, or, kind of Christian celebrity, so to speak. And so, in recent years, you've got names, if you're familiar with these, Bill Hybels, Mark Driscoll, James McDonald, Jerry Falwell Jr., Mike Breen, Ravi Zacharias. That's a small smattering. I'm a little curious that they all tend to be male, but there's just so many. And it feels like we're in a spot where even inside we're getting cynical, at very least weary of it, but certainly from the outside perspective looking on, there's a cynicism. I think we'd have it with politicians. I don't even think we expect that we expect actually something's probably going to go wrong at some point. But is that also happening then within people who are following Jesus? But it's nothing new, and it happens everywhere, and it happens at every level. Just some receive a lot more spotlight and attention when it happens. I was in my mid-20s and in seminary, and I was taking this class. It was a big class, big auditorium, and it was anthropological missiology. And it was an evening class, and this night the professor was sharing about an experience that he had while he was on the mission field, and he observed what he saw to be, it looked like an inappropriate kind of conversation or interaction between a full-time missionary that was on the field and somebody who is just kind of a part-time traveling through person. And he was sharing about the dangers of when stuff goes wrong from people that you wouldn't expect it. And I'm nervous even sharing this because I've never shared it. And sorry, I'm going to get choked up. But I'm like, oh, shoot, I know where he was. That's probably my dad that he's talking about. And he probably had no idea that the son of that particular missionary was there in that class. And having his world rocked, I went home and sobbed. I couldn't even talk. Jessica just was embracing me, worried the worst was happening, but I couldn't even share because I realized that my dad, this guy who could do no wrong, this guy who's had an amazing life and is no longer with us, may have had this encounter back in his younger years that was possibly the fruit of other things going on in his life. And he was in a different country. I wasn't going to just call him up long distance and check on him. I actually went to the professor and asked, is this the person? And he didn't want to verify that for me, but just by his non-answer, I got my answer. And man, what do you do when it's somebody close to you that has let you down? You thought they had it together, and it turns out there were some chinks in the armor. So it could have been a family member for you that hurt you. Could have been a friend or a spouse that has betrayed you. It could have been a coach that revealed poor character or no boundaries or just overly aggressive. It could have been a teacher that broke trust, a local figure that maybe you know, but clearly you didn't know everything. And then sometimes it's us. And we were that person that we never expected to be, we never set out to be, we never planned to be, and yet here we are, come face to face with our own chinks in our armor. And this happens and has happened since the beginning of time, but it's no less tragic, it's no less painful, it's no less world-shaking when it's close to home. And in the Hebrew Bible, we have this gift of a really naked and open account of history where there are no holds barred. There's no glossing for the celebrities, the hierarchy, those in power. There's no covering it up. It's just, it is what it is. And we get to read through the history of ancient Israel. In this series, actually, we're picking out 3 different characters, Hebrew influencers, if you will, 2 kings and a prophet. And we're gonna start with one in particular, but I want to give you a little bit of context so you know where he fits. Because as the people of Israel began to settle into this promised land, this land that they had been given by the Lord, and they were starting to spread out and get settled where they were at, they began to accommodate to the customs and traditions of the countries and the people groups around them because they were just really attractive. They were enthralled by them. They thought, oh, that's a really good way of doing things. The problem was God had very clearly said, don't copy and imitate the patterns of the nations around you. It will get you into trouble. And I can just hear them much like a preteen entering into middle school and wanting to dress like all of the cool kids or wanting to avoid attention. And so they need to have this or that in order to be comparable to somebody else. And Israel, probably in its pre-adolescent stage as a nation, comes in and says, hey, we need a king. This God leading us by himself through, very given voices, leaders, prophets, judges. Like, let's just have a king. It looks so much better, so much cleaner, so much more black and white, so much more comfortable. We just know what's going on because look at how they're doing it. I mean, the way we're doing it is just kind of squishy and hard to access. Can we just have a king, please? And God, talking to Samuel, the prophet and judge at that time, said, I knew they were going to ask for a king, which is why we gave instructions for a king in the law. It's not going to go well. There will be problems with this, but give them what they want. And so God allowed them to have a king and a system with plenty of warning about what was going to go down. And the very first king, King Saul, King Saul was a train wreck from beginning to end for the most part. You can read that story in the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. The second king, unlike him, God moved from his family, Saul's family line, to just completely different family line and went with David. And David became known as a man of God's own heart, the greatest king of Israel. And don't get me wrong, David actually failed spectacularly. He broke all of the 10 commandments in a really short time frame. And yet, because he kept coming back to God, throwing himself on God's mercy and forgiveness and justice and righteousness and wanting to realign with God, because of that posture of always coming back to God, God honored that and promised that he was going to cause David's line to last forever through them. And then part of that promise was the next king, David's son Solomon, and that's the guy that we're going to camp out with today. Solomon started off great. He was handed everything. David had expanded the country almost to where God had given them the boundaries, but there was more work to do. But Solomon basically had it easy. He was set up for success. Now, going into the transition period between David and Solomon, it was a little bit rocky. It was not a peaceful transfer of power at that point. But I'd like to read for you out of chapter 2 of 1 Kings. Basically, this story is 1 Kings 1 through 12, roughly, in a little bit beyond that. But we're going to just top of chapter 2. Solomon is just coming onto the scene, and David is passing the torch. And this is what he says, verse 2. I am going where everyone on earth must someday go. So he's on his deathbed. Take courage and be a man. Now that phrase for us, like be a man, we're like, now what does that exactly mean? It has nothing to do with gender. He's not comparing men to women. He's saying, like, Solomon, you're young, you're immature. We don't know how old he was, but probably he was pretty young. And he was probably stuck in still a lot of his youthful ways. And David's like, yeah, you're going to have to give that up. Like, if it was me, it'd be like my freshman year of college where I spent all of my time in the game room. It'd be like God going, hey, it's time to go to class. It's time to grow up, start actually getting some A's in some of those classes. Time to be a man, not a child. Observe the requirements of the Lord your God and follow all his ways. Keep the decrees, commands, regulations, and laws written in the law of Moses so that you will be successful in all you do wherever you go. If you do this, then the Lord will keep the promise that he made me, to David. He told me, if your descendants live as they should and follow me faithfully with all their heart and soul, one of them will always sit on the throne of Israel. What a remarkable promise of a dynasty. Of security, of God leading through his family. And Solomon does. He starts off well. He starts off wisely, actually, in that he brings justice to that situation. Again, it was a rocky transfer of power. And there were actually alliances and contracts that David had made that he kept people alive that he probably shouldn't have, but he was true to his word. He was faithful to his word. He was going to keep his promise. And he said, hey, Solomon, if these guys who you probably can't trust start giving you trouble, do the right thing. And so Solomon does. He says, here's what's going to go down. You need to either do it this way, or else here are the consequences. And every one of them stepped out of line. And Solomon brought it down on them. And what happened was it brought that country together. It brought where there's a lot of like competing regional rulers. There was like, oh, we can trust this guy. And it really brought cohesion to this fledgling nation just trying to figure out what it looked like to live under a king. And then chapter 3 opens up this way. Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. And to us, you're like, that seems like a pretty sweet deal. Like Pharaoh's like the regional superpower. Egypt is the regional superpower. Marry his daughter, because marriage was a lot political and about alliances and treaties. Maybe sometimes for love, but that was never kind of the main objective. That wasn't the purpose for marriage at that point. But to those reading this, 1 Kings for the very first time, they're like, wait, what? Egypt? Like, that's who we were enslaved to. Why is he making a treaty with the Pharaoh of Egypt? And then verse 3 of chapter 3 says, Solomon loved the Lord and followed all the decrees of his father David, except, you never want the except in there, right? It's the but that's just dropping. You're just waiting for it. But it's like, shoot. Except that Solomon too offered sacrifices and burned incense at the local places of worship. God's heart was jealous to have his people get to know him and trust him completely and worship him alone. And it just was always so tempting to go after the shiny new gods or the shiny new concepts or philosophies or things that seemed like maybe they'd offered more control over a very turbulent situation than the God of their ancestors. And yet, even in Solomon's messiness, his weakness, his immaturity, God meets with him. Like, he shows up right after this in a dream, and he begins to speak to him. Solomon, in gratitude, offered thousands of sacrifices on these altars that he wasn't even supposed to go near. He was supposed to tear them down and do away with them. So it's just like this mixed message of, I love you, Lord, but he's doing it kind of in the wrong ways. And yet God still, in his grace and his compassion, meets him in that moment, and he appears to him in a dream. And this is what he said, verse 5. That night, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream, and God said, what do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you. Can you imagine, like, God of the universe coming to you and saying, you're like, we just got done with a fantastic worship set on Sunday morning. We've brought like our biggest tithes and offerings. We've sacrificed. We're here. We're going through hard times. And then in the middle of our tears, God says, what do you want? Just name it. Now, before we go all like genie in a bottle with 3 wishes that were granted on this, I would like to know what you would ask that same God if you knew that question was actually a little bit of a test. If you knew that God actually was checking your character to see actually what was in your heart and what that would reveal about what you truly wanted. And Solomon, realizing he's immature, feeling probably very inadequate and like he doesn't have all of the tools for that job, let alone to follow in his dad's footsteps. He said, I want wisdom. I want discernment to be able to lead your people well. And in that day, the king had both the executive and judicial branches merged into him. He was both of those things. They didn't need a legislative. That was already taken care of. God had given it to Moses. They had the law set. They just needed to immerse themselves in it, know it, live it, love it, and then execute that justice on behalf of the people, especially those who were most vulnerable, that God had an eye out for. And God said, yeah, I'd be more than happy to give you wisdom, to give you discernment, to give you everything you need to lead my people well. He was only too happy to not only give him that, but honestly, he's like, and I know that probably there's a lot of other things on your list you might have asked for or wanted to ask for. Those are yours too. He just wanted to bless that good intent and that good intention. And he poured out prosperity on Solomon. And so Solomon began his career, it just took off, skyrocket. He started getting known not just by his people who were loving what was happening, but the surrounding nations were taking note of how Israel was prospering and the wealth that he was generating. He actually got to build the temple for the Lord, because before it had just been this tabernacle that had been toting around the wilderness, setting up and down, probably more than a circus tent. It was wear and worn, and God needed and deserved a better house, and David wanted to build it for him, but God said, nope, that's going to be your son's job. Solomon got to do it, and it was the most fantastic, one of the wonders of the world at that point. It took 7 years to build, and at the end of those 7 years, Solomon threw a 2-week party for 14 days. It was just sacrificing and worshiping and hanging out and eating and drinking and thanking God for his provision and for where he had gotten them. It was just can you imagine a 2-week party? Like a national 2-week party, and that's fully funded. I don't even know. That's awesome. And then after that, and Solomon again just sacrifices an enormous amount of wealth to the Lord in thanks. And God comes to him again. And he just reaffirms that promise. Says, Solomon, I see what you're doing here, and I want to bless you. But just a warning, if you lead my people astray, all of this will be gone. All of this will be gone. All right. Chapter 10. We start hearing his celebrity has spread so far, even like we get this mention of the Queen of Sheba in the Bible, who is like top of the line ruler, comes to visit Solomon, is blown away. She brings gifts, but like he says, even the reports that she heard didn't do Solomon justice. So I'm going to read this out of chapter 10, verses 23 through 28. So King Solomon became richer and wiser than any other king on earth. People from every nation came to consult him and to hear his wisdom that God had given him. Year after year, everyone who visited brought him gifts of silver and gold, clothing, weapons, spices, horses, and mules. Solomon built up a huge force of chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses. He stationed some of them in the chariot cities and some near him in Jerusalem, which is the capital city. The king made silver as plentiful in Jerusalem as stone. Okay, that's a statement. And valuable cedar timber was as common as the sycamore fig trees that grow in the foothills of Judah. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and from Cilicia. The king's traders acquired them from Cilicia at the standard price. Now, to our modern ears, all of this sounds like just fabulous success, lifestyles of the rich and famous. So, what was God so worried about in all of this? Well, Solomon's got it all, and everyone gets to get in on the action, but what you'll note is God's not getting a lot of mention throughout this passage of what Solomon is able to accomplish. And so there's some red flags here about how Solomon is going about doing what he's doing. Plus, those original readers who were reading through this and just learning about what Solomon did, they were no doubt incredibly aware that for a guy that was supposed to know God's voice and instruction, remember, he's supposed to immerse himself in the law, love it, meditate on it, he had completely missed God's very clear direction for what kings should avoid. And if you haven't read it, this is in Deuteronomy. This is going back to when Moses originally received the law. God knew they were going to ask for a king down the line. He said, if you get a king, here's some parameters for you. And let's take a look at those. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 17. I'll read verses 14 through 20. You are about to enter into the land the Lord your God is giving you. When you take it over and settle there, you may think, we should select a king to rule over us like the other nations around us. And if this happens, be sure to select as king the man the Lord your God chooses. You must appoint a fellow Israelite. He may not be a foreigner. The king must not build up a large stable of horses for himself or send his people to Egypt to buy horses. For the Lord has told you, you must never return to Egypt. And now it's like, oh, if you're familiar with that instruction at all, now Solomon's wealth, you're like, what is he doing? It's like obvious. How did he miss this? He must always keep that. Oh, sorry, I skipped some verses. The king must not take many wives for himself because they will turn his heart away from the Lord. And he must not accumulate large amounts of wealth in silver and gold for himself. Silver was as common as stone, evidently. When he sits on the throne as king, he must copy for himself this body of instruction on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priests. He must always keep that copy with him and read it daily as long as he lives. That way, he will learn to fear the Lord his God by obeying all the terms of these instructions and decrees. This regular reading will prevent him from becoming proud and acting as if he is above his fellow citizens. It will also prevent him from turning away from these commands in the smallest way, and it will ensure that he and his descendants will reign for many generations in Israel. So now all of a sudden this success story in chapter 10 is like, oh, shoot. This is going to go sideways in a hurry because Solomon violated every one of these parameters. God wanted the kings of Israel to be dependent on him. He was going to bless, but he didn't want it to be an excessive self-dependence and self-reliance and having to make alliances with others for your own self-security. Have you ever felt like the rules just didn't apply to you? When we're out driving, this has happened. It doesn't happen a lot, but it's happened from time to time. My wife, who is and always has been a really good rule follower. It's one of the things I admire about her, actually. She frequently lets me know that while I'm doing something, stupid or slightly illegal on the road, that I think that the rules of the road don't apply to me. They maybe only apply to other people. And of course, I laugh and I just go ahead and pull into that place that says, do not enter here, because there was no traffic and it was a straight shot, and why not? is not a good thing. It's not a good thing. It's a small thing, but it's actually problematic. And the last time she said this, I actually gave pause when she said, why do you think all of these laws are an exception for you? Why do you think you're exceptional? Why do you think, she didn't say above the law, but that's essentially how this translated. I'm like, do I actually believe that? And if I do this in a really small area, are there possibly other areas where I actually compromise and convince myself, I get the principle of the law, but I think I can do this without hurting me or myself or my family or blah, blah, blah. Is this compromise really an inroads to a pattern of behavior? So when we read Solomon's story, and like we do so many news reports of people in the public eye, we're not supposed to then point and laugh and judge and just get cynical about all leaders everywhere. We're actually supposed to pause and look inside and say, wait, is possibly something that I'm hearing out here also true of me? Or am I tempted in some ways that this person was also very easily tempted to justify their actions? The humble phrase usually goes, there but for the grace of God go I. Have you heard that? I mean, when you see somebody fall spectacularly, well, the humble phrase would be, there but for the grace of God go I. And honestly, I don't think it's God's grace that's on our side. If we're not getting caught, we're in trouble. More appropriately, the humility should say, are there actions and attitudes in my life that will set me up for failure down the road? Am I on a similar course, maybe in a different direction? For Solomon, it could have been, it's just a few horses from this neighboring dignitary. It's a generous gesture. I don't want to offend. It's a blessing. I won't let it go to my head. And it starts there, and pretty soon he has 15,000 horses? I actually don't remember the number now. And keep in mind, horses, this wasn't just like, if you're familiar with Jay Leno, this is old school comic, but he has a massive collection of cars, sports cars, antique cars, collectible cars, right? Because we have our pet collections, and if you've got more money, you can afford better collections. And this wasn't that for Solomon, maybe partly, but this was military buildup. This was him not taking seriously that God wanted to be their defense and shield and protector. He didn't want the king to step up and take on that role for himself and make alliances that God had not greenlit. And so that self-reliance and that power positioning were replacing a reliance on the God who wanted to reveal himself. I'll just dive into really quickly what that success was actually doing. He pursued stability through shortcuts by marrying an Egyptian. He pursued excessive wealth, pursued celebrity, pursued power through military buildup, didn't pursue God's presence, God's direction, God's teaching, God's power, God's protection. Oh, and the women. Solomon pursued pleasure and control by marrying more women than most of us have followers on social. Running out of time, but I really want to read this in 1 Kings chapter 11. Now, King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, you must not marry them because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. What a big heart. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. Scrolling down to 1 Kings 11, verse 9, the Lord was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. He had warned Solomon specifically about worshiping other gods, but Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command. It feels like a long way from Solomon marrying the daughter of a regional superpower, Egypt, to 700 wives and 300 concubines. Can't even begin. But the habits of either destruction through compromise or fruitfulness through integrity usually start in us pretty young, and they usually start with something pretty small. Craig Groeschel summarized this principle this way: the decisions we make today determine the stories we tell tomorrow. And could we just keep that up for a while? The decisions we make today determine the stories we tell tomorrow. The beautiful thing is we keep that in the forefront, is that our Father God is always continuing to woo us even in and through our missteps. God came to Solomon and he's coming to us. He's constantly trying to woo us away from those fatal missteps, the tripping up. But God also provides opportunities for course correction along the way through painful consequences. Hebrews tells us God disciplines those he loves. He wants to course correct. And yes, sometimes that can be painful, the consequences of our own behavior, but it's a moment where we can stop and reflect. Could I do something differently to avert what's certainly going to come or get worse from here? But ultimately, the choice is ours whether we will stop and take inventory or if we'll just keep plowing on and not take time to listen to what God is trying to course correct. On the proactive side, reflecting on our habits and being intentional about weeding out the problematic and embracing the beneficial. On the reactive side, reflecting on why we're getting the negative results we're currently getting and then making corrections. And so I just want to close out our time by doing a little bit of introspection. Just a little bit of quiet introspection before we go to see if God might be getting our attention. This is a 3-week series, so there's more to come. But I want to start with a humble posture of God. Is there anything in us that you might want to give us a heads up about that actually is going to be very detrimental for us down the road? So here are some self-reflection questions, and we'll just take a minute. Do I have transparent, intimate relationships where friends can ask me questions about anything? This can be a preventative thing, but do we even have a posture that allows this? Do I have transparent, intimate relationships where friends can ask me questions about anything? What areas of compromise am I seeing where I feel like an exception or like rules don't apply to me? What areas of compromise am I seeing where I feel like I might be an exception or like rules don't apply to me? In what areas of your life am I completely self-sufficient and self-reliant? And a clue might be, have I refused help recently for anything? And then the final question for self-reflection. What practices keep me spending time with Jesus, listening to him, knowing him, and doing what he says? Set me up to obey what he's asking me to do, to follow through on what he's asked us to do. What practices do I keep that keep me listening and tuned into God's heart? O Lord God of Israel, there is no God like you in all of heaven above or on the earth below. You keep your covenant and you show unfailing love to all who walk before you in wholehearted devotion. Lord God, we want to again, just like we sang earlier in this gathering, surrender to you, offer our hearts to you. But would you please, in your mercy and goodness, point out any errant way in us, anything that is leading us down a self-destructive path or just full of self-dependence instead of reliance on you. God, please, would you show us those behaviors or those thought patterns? And gently, lovingly, would you show us a way through them? Would you show us the path of setting that aside and what it looks like to come and realign ourselves with you? God, we want you. We desire what you have on the other side. We desire the picture you have painted of what your kingdom coming and all its goodness and fullness is. So God, open up our eyes to the blind spots and give us the courage to step into whatever you might be asking us to, even this week as we spend time reflecting and listening to you. Thank you, Lord Jesus. for these character studies, for these meditations on people's lives that reveal that we're just the same and a new path forward. You are good, and we want our lives to reflect you, both individually and collectively as a faith family. May we sing your praise. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Don't forget, one-stop shop, wm.church, for all of your information needs, your questions that you might have, and all other signups. We go with that blessing that God is with you.